Chapter 31, Wounds of the Heart. That evening, the USS Okinawa eased slowly through the South China Sea, with choppers parked quietly on the deck, rotor blades folded back. A waning moon shone at less than half illumination through a thin veil of passing clouds, a soft glow cresting each gentle wave across the ocean's surface. For Lieutenant Donald Teal, the senior medical officer in charge of casualty care, the day had been a battle of another sort. A flood of wounded Marines had been shuttled from helicopters, some limping out on the support of a sailor's shoulder, others carried on stretchers and brought down by the port aircraft elevator platform to a large triage on the hangar deck. From the triage area, the most seriously injured were quickly brought up by hoist to a resuscitation area in the hospital above. The day had been a frenzy of blood and bandages, shrapnel clinking into stainless steel bins, stitching and swearing, conducting, calling, coordinating men and movements, gathering supplies, and rigging things. As wounded Marines were transported from the flight deck to the hangar deck, their sweat-stenched and field-worn utilities were searched for grenades, which were then tossed quickly overboard, with one of them even exploding in the water. By the time the day's work had settled, Teal was exhausted. He stood out near the bridge in the sea-salted breeze and watched for the last casualties to arrive from the battlefield. It was now the dead that were left to come, and it was his job to receive them. In the crackling voice on the bridge radio, they were called KIAs, Killed in Action, and it sickened him to hear it said that way, human beings reduced to a mere acronym, to a dispassionate string of letters that conveyed no real sense of the horror that had befallen them. To Teal, they were more than just letters on a page. They were more than just statistics to be tallied up and reported back to headquarters. He shook his head to himself, shook off the idea that he might ever feel different, even after 100 more days like today. The western mountains were cast in shadow, their rounded peaks outlined in silhouette against a magnificent array of colors. Where the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sky had turned a vibrant shade of orange that faded into soft pink and lavender hues. As the minutes passed on the wind-swept bridge and the dusk deepened, the colors became richer and more intense, with streaks of crimson and gold intermingling with the softer pastels. It was difficult to reconcile a god that would create such beauty and such ugliness just the same. Still, Teal thanked him for giving him the foresight to prepare as he had, and for the USS Sanctuary hospital ship, which was adrift nearby, where the most critically wounded had been flown. Normally, the hospital ships operated independently of the Amphibious Ready Group, or ARG, Dr. Teal tells me. But we had no surgical team when I got out there with the ARG and the Special Landing Force. I had maintained from the beginning that we were not giving our Marines the best care unless we had a surgical team, and I took this concern to the SLF commander, colonel, and the commodore. "You've got 4 doctors here," Colonel Conway had said firmly but respectfully. "Can't you elect one of them as a surgeon, one to give anesthesia and another to do your, what'd you call it?" "Orthopedics, sir." "No. Yes. I'm not saying no. I can do it that way, but, sir, it will cost more Marine lives. None of us are fully trained surgeons, and none of us are trained in anesthesia at all." Where Teal had trained for his internship, there was a big county hospital, but downtown there was also a small emergency hospital. If someone got shot or injured in a car wreck, they would often take them first to the emergency hospital, only to find the injury so bad that they had to send them out again to the county hospital. "Well, that wasted tons of time," he recounted to the colonel and the commodore. "In the meantime, we lost lives. People would bleed to death or lose their ability to breathe, and so on." Commodore McManus was a great leader to work with, Don tells me, partly because he looked at me and said, "Dr. Teal, please tell me what I should do." "Sir, the modern standard for casualty care is to have the casualties go to where the surgeons are, where the fully trained surgeons are," he said. "Ideally, we need the hospital ship with all the specialists on it. Since there's no chance we'll get a surgical team in time for our first combat operation, we need to have the hospital ship work with us and coordinate with us, not out floating 30 miles away like they are now, sir." Now, that's against the Geneva Convention, Dr. Teal tells me. The Commodore knew that. The Colonel and I knew it. We all knew it was against the Geneva Convention. Wait, I say, what was against the Geneva Convention? I'd heard of the Geneva Convention, heard it mentioned in the movies anyway. It was some kind of treaty or protocol for treating soldiers humanely when they were no longer combatants. But I didn't understand what it could have to do with ships at sea. Hospital ships are not allowed, Don tells me. They don't even carry cryptographic equipment. They're not allowed to communicate except on an open circuit. They're not allowed to have any secret communication with a combat force. I told the Commodore we needed to have an agreement that if somebody was really badly injured, the helicopter pilots and crewmen needed to take them directly to the hospital ship. If they came to the Okinawa first, just for us to have to wave them off to the hospital ship, that kind of delay would cost lives. To exact such an order in violation of the Geneva Convention, McManus knew that he would have to be the most senior-ranking officer. Of course, as a very senior Navy captain, the Commodore was the ranking military officer of the fleet, and Colonel Conway was a senior Marine colonel. The trouble was that the hospital ship was driven by a senior Navy captain. Moreover, the doctor in charge of the hospital part of the ship was also a senior captain. The Commodore spent all afternoon getting his XO to go over all the dates of command, Don tells me. Everybody, every officer in both commands, Navy and Marines, had a date of rank, and so seniority was dependent on the date of rank. Say, if the Commodore's date of rank was 1 day earlier than the commander of the hospital ship, then the Commodore outranked the commander of the hospital ship. You mean when their rank title matches, then you go next by the date of rank? I ask. In other words, if I've got commanding officers on 2 different ships, the one who outranks the other is the one who became a commanding officer first. Right, and it turned out that our Commodore was senior to the captains in the hospital ship, he tells me. So even though it was against the Geneva Convention, they had to obey his order. Guess who got to take the orders to the hospital ship? The Commodore gave Teal a satchel containing new orders to carry to the USS Sanctuary. Teal never read the orders, but he hoped the Commodore had worded them so that he would actually succeed in getting the needed support. So before Operation Beaver Cage had commenced, Teal flew over to the Sanctuary with the satchel in hand. I met the captain and the helmsman, he says, and I met the commander of the hospital on the hospital ship. They were all smiles and cordial, you know. To them, I was just a nice young officer coming over there from the Okinawa. They didn't know yet what the orders said. But then the captain opened the satchel that Teal had brought over. Teal watched the captain's face turning flush as he read, his mumbled dictation suddenly quieting and slowing to a stop. His hand dropped with the orders, and his head rose, with lips curled and one eye twitching on a nerve, a laser-piercing glare that split Teal from groin to head. You've never seen anybody literally almost explode in front of your eyes, he tells me. The captain erupted in a madly censorious tirade, something about somebody's goddamned bright idea and who in the hell or what the hell and the goddamned international law and my goddamn career. As spittle flung from the captain's mouth, Teal centered his focus on the left common carotid artery, bulging from his neck, and in the transillumination of light, he saw even a streak of blue bending around the man's mandible, the kind of pressures that could trigger a brain aneurysm or a cardiac arrest. At least they were on a hospital ship. I thought the next thing was going to be, make him walk the plank or something, Don says. That was kind of famous. After that, the play nice was done with. He had no choice. He knew he had no choice, and he knew he was breaking the Geneva Convention, but his senior officer had ordered him to do so. Teal was happy to return to the LPH alive, feeling much better knowing they had the Sanctuary as their primary hospital and that he would only have to take the lesser injuries on the LPH. He had his chief work with the crew chiefs of the helos and with several sergeants in the battalion to explain where the critical injuries were to go. Still, there was the problem of getting a trained surgical team to work with him on Okinawa, but at least for the time being, he'd done what needed to be done. As the sun set that evening during Operation Beaver Cage on the 5th of May, he wondered if they had saved lives. Just one would have been worth it, worth everything, in fact. He would have liked to call over on the radio to find out, but even if it wasn't on an open circuit, they weren't exactly friends. In the distance, against the shadow of the mountains, the chopper's green and red navigation lights finally appeared to bring in the dead. Teal made his way down from the bridge to ready himself for a second shift of work that he would soon come to call his night job, performing the somber job normally known in the military as graves registration. The bodies never arrived in a body bag, he tells me. They would arrive with a tarp thrown over them. Just thrown in the helicopter, you know. They didn't come in on stretchers. We had bearers that would take stretchers out to meet the halo, and they put the body on a stretcher there, but they still weren't in a body bag. So we would go back down to the hangar deck and then forward into these 3 bathrooms. Those killed in combat were always brought on board separately on the starboard elevator on the opposite side of the ship. Teal and his crew of Navy corpsmen worked discreetly and made every effort possible to ensure that no Marines, especially the wounded, could ever look over to the stretcher next to them and see a dead comrade. The sun finally gave way to darkness as crewmen washed out the chopper bays and Navy sailors swept blood-stained water from the deck. The chopper's blades were folded back, then rolled aside for the night, leaving 2 empty spots where Thunder Eagles had been parked the night before. Pilots and crewmen of the SLF's HMM-263, the Helicopter Marine Medium Squadron, settled into their bunks where they lay, each too long awake, no doubt, still reeling from the day's events. In the trauma bay, intravenous fluids were checked and refilled, pain meds were delivered, pulses were checked, and lights were dimmed. In the mess hall, sailors whispered in the night light while gazing pensively over cooling cups of coffee. There was often a certain friction and competitiveness between the squids and the Marines, but on this night, only quiet contemplation and respect. From the large open bay on the hangar deck, one might have seen a trail of dancing light from the crescent moon pointing across the sea and shrinking away to a vanishing point, precisely wherever one looks. And more than one would be looking, I imagine, at that angel in the distance, glowing pristine white in the moonlight with 3 large crosses painted on her side, the USS Sanctuary. To this day, the smell of wintergreen makes me ill, Teal says. It's just one of many such awful memories. Outside of the head on the hangar deck, before opening the door, Teal and his assistants soaked their masks in oil of wintergreen. The 3 forward bathrooms he'd referred to were makeshift morgues, this being the first, with 2 more soon to be required. After stacking bodies along the bulkhead of the first, they'd soon have to take over 2 more and connect the 3 with big fans, because only the 3rd head had a porthole to the outside air. None of this was known to him yet, however. All he knew at this point was that the morgue in Da Nang he'd been told about did not yet exist. Before deploying to Westpac, Teal had asked the senior doctor in the Marine Amphibious Forces what protocol they were to follow for handling the bodies of those killed in the field of combat. "The number of fatal casualties will be light," answered his Navy captain, a medical officer. "Those that occur will be taken directly to the morgue in Da Nang, so you're not to be concerned." But when the task group arrived on the combat line, Teal learned otherwise. So Teal and his boys gathered white plastic sheets and body bags, pages of medical forms on clipboards, and ink pads for fingerprinting. In a somber procrastination of the job they had to do, they prepared these things, then donned their oil-soaked masks and nitrile gloves, and stepped inside to do a job that was to take them all night to finish. In a short personal memoir that Don shared with me, he wrote that he remembered how, before he entered the morgue, he felt like he had to shrug off his soul, as if it were a garment that he didn't want to be soiled by what he was about to see and do. "I remembered carefully hanging up my soul on a hook outside the morgue, and then I would slowly enter night after night. Later, I would pick up my soul as I left the morgue and return to my duties, faking it as if nothing had happened. Not wanting anyone reading my anguish in my face, I wanted to be solid as a rock, able to absorb any emotional trauma to protect my crew, trying always to look and act normal, to carry on. I became that rock. But that rock had eyes. My eyes gave me away." The room was cold and cramped, illuminated only by the soft glow of weak fluorescent lights over stainless steel sinks with exposed P-traps and pipes running into the floors where the bodies lay. It would take all night to clean them up, he tells me. They stripped off the uniforms and made sure there were no booby traps or live weapons, cleaned up the bodies, and then, as Don tells me, did preparations that I won't go into. Teal knelt down and placed a gentle hand on one Marine's shoulder as if to offer a final comfort to the lifeless form. With a careful touch, he lifted the Marine's arm, studied his wounds with a clinical detachment, and then marked them on the outline of a mannequin on the page. His attention then turned to the Marine's hand, which was soft and bloated with gas, darkened black from a day in the sun. He took it delicately in his own, holding it with the utmost care as he pressed each finger to the ink pad and then onto each of the 33 pages in his clipboard. It was a solemn ritual that Teal would have to perform all too often, but each time he did it, he would do so with reverence and respect for the life that had been lost. I was just seeing the most horrible things, he says. I still have the side effects from running the morgue. Every single Marine that was killed in that 9 months, I was the doctor who signed their death certificate. I was the one who examined the remains of their bodies before I signed the death certificate. For each death certificate, I had to sign 33 pages. I signed my name around over 3,000 times for the Marines that had been killed. That's a memory that I'm still seeing a counselor for. This, of course, he did not yet know. After gently wrapping each Marine in a white plastic sheet, they placed them in body bags and carried them through dimly lit passageways to the ship's food lockers. There, they lay in the frigid air alongside the boxes of food that would soon be shoveled onto trays in the mess hall for hungry sailors and Marines. I write of this scene from Don's brief memoir, which I am honored to have read. This scenario was certainly not even remotely resembling the dramatic return of the war dead in rows of silver coffins, each one neatly embellished with an American flag. The memoir is unpublished as far as I know, printed on tattered paper and tucked away in a drawer.